Hi everyone, apologies for the late start. I'd just like to welcome you all to the first of the 4 series for the Making Tax Digital webinar that we are hosting. To kick us off with, I'll do some quick intros for myself and Leslie. So I'll be one of your presenters today. My name is Dorcas Whitty. I'm one of the senior product managers here at Waters Clearer. My main responsibilities are within the personal tax products and also making tax digital. My career spans about 8 years within the tax technology field. So started my career in tax tech, and I've made it all the way up to here. So great industry to be in nonetheless. I'll hand over to Leslie for his intro.
Hi, my name's Leslie McQuigg. I started at KPMG doing UK-US personal tax, moved into tax technology, I think around the start of self-assessment. Role there was made redundant and joined what was then CCH Software, now Waters Clearer as a business analyst. So initially supported or looked after TaxPoint, one of the predecessors to personal tax. Was involved in the initial online filing for self-assessment. Sort of suppose the role today, I support the personal tax teams on the compliance, so supporting Helen Page and other SMEs. Done a lot of accelerated development over the years, and in terms of MTD for income tax, I'm the lead in the technology team for that.
Brilliant. Thanks, Leslie. So just a bit of housekeeping before we start. We'll be taking questions towards the end of the webinar, but do feel free to drop them either in the chat or in the Q&A, and we'll be monitoring that as we go along. So do feel free to drop in your questions as they come to mind. So just to give you guys a bit of a background in terms of MTD and where we are today. So Making Tax Digital is essentially the government's initiative to transform the tax service. Originally, it did want to start off with income tax, and that got pushed down the can just because of complexities. So the first wave of Making Tax Digital started off with VAT. And now we're approaching the mandation of income tax, and partnerships is going to follow, where we don't really have any timelines yet in terms of dates set. And that's also with corporation tax. We haven't got any dates as to when they will come into mandation. There's been a few questions and rumours going around regarding the confidence of the income tax initiative being mandated come April 2026. And as part of the autumn budget, Rachel Reeves kind of doubled down on her and her government's commitment to deliver on MTD for the timelines that I've set. It's a really key priority for them, especially when it comes to closing the tax gap, which at the moment is just under £40 billion. And for self-assessment, that makes up around 5 billion of that. So they're really keen to kind of bridge that gap. In terms of what the requirements are for making tax digital for income tax, it's around 3 key areas. The first one is around maintaining digital records, so that HMRC has a clear view around the digital link or digital journey, as they like to refer to it, from source right up until the submission. And then there's also the submission of at least quarterly submissions made through compatible MTD software. And then lastly, it's all about submitting all of your allowances and adjustments post-year to those quarterly submissions, utilising the final declaration. And essentially the final declaration is looking to replace the current tax return that we file with self-assessment, and that would include all of your additional non-business income sources that you would add as part of that process. So what does this really mean? Essentially, it means that with this new service, HMRC has a lot of the data in hand. and are actually going to surface that information to software vendors like ourselves, and therefore to taxpayers and accountants. And that essentially means more pre-population of the data. It means better quality of the data that you're getting as well. We're all quite familiar with the DTA service and how poor the quality of data is there. The MTD service is looking to improve on that. And with better quality data, you're also getting real-time data, or near to real-time as we possibly can, from HMRC, so that you're having the data that you need at hand in order to prepare for these reports. In terms of who's affected, so making tax digital for income tax is going to be phased in 2 waves that we have clear dates on at the moment. So the first tranche, essentially, of mandated taxpayers will be those sole traders and landlords that have a gross income of 50,000 and above. And that's going to impact almost 800,000 taxpayers. And then in April 2027, we'll have the second wave of mandated taxpayers, and those would be the landlords and sole traders that have a gross income of 30k and above. There is this 20k and above mandation or threshold that HMRC and the government are looking at. But we haven't got any specific dates yet as to when those would come into mandation. It was something that was flagged as part of the autumn budget by the Chancellor. So with that, I guess it's time for us to kick off our first poll in terms of, to what extent would you agree with this statement? My practice is ready to support clients in MTD for income tax. The polls should be appearing on screen in a couple of seconds for you to put in your scores. Okay, we're getting a few mixed results. Nobody, or very limited amount of you guys, strongly agree with this statement, but the vast majority, it looks like, are kind of in the middle, where you somewhat agree with this statement and very much neutral, where you neither agree or disagree. There are quite a few, 23% and 12%, where you somewhat disagree or strongly disagree with that statement. So hopefully, as we kind of work our way through the presentation, we can start to up some of those somewhat disagrees and start to bump them up, so that you can have a bit more confidence around the journey and the process utilising CCH. So I'll hand it over to Leslie.
Okay, so it says fact versus fiction. What MTD for income tax doesn't mean is having to do a tax return quarterly. There are quarterly submissions, but that's of the business income and expenses for sole trade, UK property and foreign property only. The next one talks about transactional data. The revenue will not get any access to transactional data, whether you're using bridging software, so it's on a spreadsheet and brought into our software, or using third-party bookkeeping. The transactional data stays outside. What happens is that's aggregated, and it's the summary income and expenses which get reported to HMRC. There is no requirement about doing capital allowances or business adjustments quarterly. There was an end of period statement obligation, and that was to do with once you finished the 4 quarters, you did your adjustments for the business, and then you said the business was complete for the year. Now, whilst the obligation is no longer there, it's now tied up as part of the final declaration. There's still that process of going through, entering disallowable expenses, claiming your capital allowances, and that's all done after the submission of the 4 quarters, but before the final declaration is made. The next one's about quarterly tax payments. So I'm sure the revenue will be very keen if taxpayers start making quarterly tax payments in year, or as close to in year as possible. Initially, before MTD was postponed, To fulfill the obligation for a quarter, you had to submit data. We then had to trigger a calculation and retrieve that calculation and display the liability to the taxpayer. That's no longer the case for 25, or basically from April this year. The only need or the only requirement for the obligation is to submit the data. The reason for that is the revenue did research, and it showed that the calculations were only accurate for 47% of taxpayers. And the last one here is the 31st of January deadline no longer applies. That's not true. If you know me, I'll keep banging on about the fact that there is no tax return, but the 31st of January deadline still applies. And that means that the taxpayer or their agents have got until 31st of January to finalise the affairs for the year. If there's not done, then there'll be a penalty. The same way as if the self-assessment tax return is not sent to the revenue by the 31st of January. Next slide, please, Dorcas. And can you kick off the poll? So this poll is asking what percentage of your client bases are using paper rather than digital records. Okay, I'll start the poll. No, thank you.
So we're getting some really good feedback here. I think the highest at the moment is 28%. Are saying that 26 to 50% of your client base currently send through paper. So there is a real need to start to transition those customers onto bookkeeping solutions. So I think I'll give it a few more seconds and then we'll end the poll. Yeah.
Okay. This slide shows sort of the MTD process within our software. It doesn't convey some of the, I suppose, complexities of MTD for income tax, but it shows, it sort of highlights the journey that we've got. So in the top left, and Dorcas will show this later, the journey will start from CCH Central, where we can create the tax year for MTD for income tax in our cloud software, CCH iFirm. What it then will do, it will check and see whether the taxpayer has authorised you as their agent to act on their behalf. If it doesn't, then it will generate a link which can be shared with the taxpayer. So via email, the taxpayer will then follow the link, go onto the revenue website, they would sign in and authorise you. Once they've done that, then we can retrieve the business details. So what business they've got, self-employment, UK property, etc., and also whether the obligations are met for the 4 quarters. In terms of signing up taxpayers to MTD for income tax, that has to be done on the revenue website. And as part of that process, you also complete the business details. I watched demo this morning, and they will pre-populate a lot of that data from self-assessment across into MTD, but it's up to you to check that going through the process of signing up your taxpayers to MTD. After that, we've got the quarterly submissions. Now they can either be done in our software, and we can do that via a spreadsheet where we upload the information, or it can be done via bookkeeping software and do the quarterly submissions there. Once you get past the 4 submissions, then we need to provide all the other information to finalise the year. So as I mentioned before, there's the end of year adjustments for the business, disallowable expenses, capital allowances. There's all other income and expenses, so gift aid, bank interest, dividends, etc. And that data has to be submitted to the revenue. Unlike now in self-assessment, where there's a single submission of a tax return either via PDF or by XML, there are a series of submissions of data. For the final declaration, we then have to trigger a calculation with a particular calculation type, which is intent to finalize. And we get back a calculation ID. We can retrieve the calculation. As agents, you would then share that calculation with the taxpayer. The calculation ID will act in a very similar way to the IR mark that you have currently. And if the taxpayer agrees with that, then basically it's setting a flag in changing the calculation type from intent to finalize to final declaration. And that will then, once the obligation is met, that finishes the tax affairs for the year. But sort of the key thing here is currently under self-assessment, with regards to whether you've got a single agent, a main agent, or main and supporting agent, it's the main agent that submits the tax return. There is a single submission. In MTD, supporting agents can do the submissions for the businesses, and then the main agent finishes off with doing the other income and making the final declaration. Next slide, please, Dorcas. Okay, this shows the 4 quarters, and we've got a UK property business and then one self-employment, and those are the 2 types of business we currently support in CCH iFirm. If you look at the in-year, we've got the dates. So the first quarter date, 6th of April to 5th of July, makes sense, it's 3 months. If we look at the second quarter, it's the 6th of April to the 5th of October. So it's the first 6 months of the year. Q3, the first 9 months. Q4 is 12 months. The reason for this is previously, before the small business review and before MTD for income tax was postponed, if you'd submitted Q1 and you'd found out that there was a mistake in Q2, you had to go back and resubmit Q1. If in Q3 you found there was a mistake, you had to go back and resubmit Q1 and then do your Q3. Now, if you're in Q2 and there's a mistake, you don't need to resubmit the first quarter. You just include that as part of the figure for the 6 months for the Q2 and do a single submission. So the idea of the cumulative quarters is to make the submission process easier. Now, for self-employment, each self-employment business has its own submission, which makes sense. And it sort of mirrors what you have with the SA 103 at the moment. For a property business, you either got a UK property business or a foreign property business. And again, that mirrors the SA 105 for UK property, so page 2, or the SA 106. Now, that property business includes all the properties that the taxpayer has ownership in, whether they're owned individually or jointly. Now, that's a problem if you've got joint ownership, if you've got different agents, because when you make a submission, it's an all or nothing. It's not like one person can submit your property in London and a second person can submit the property information for Newcastle. There needs to be a single submission. Because of the complexities around this, there was an easement for joint property, which is that where you've got joint property, you don't need to submit the expenses. You only need to submit the income for the joint property. For solely owned property that the taxpayer has, and for self-employment or the sole trade business, they need to do the submission of income and expenses. Okay, after the 4 quarters, then we're into this final declaration flow, and that's where you would enter all the other information and expenses. And then again, the final declaration is made by the 31st of January following the end of the tax year. Next slide, please, Dorcas. Okay. This says who is automatically exempt. This was pulled from the revenue website apart from the last bullet point. And one of the reasons for leaving it in there is that I want to highlight that not all the information that's coming out of the revenue around MTD for income tax is correct. So the statutory instrument at the bottom, 2021-1076, lists the exemptions. So trustees are there, but it doesn't specifically mention charitable trustee. It does mention the national insurance number. The personal representative is included as part of the trustees. Non-resident company is there. Lloyd's members aren't there. they're not exempt from MTD for income tax. They're just not within the scope. The other exemptions are digitally excluded, so that's the same as for MTD for income tax. It's a foreign business for a taxpayer that's not UK domiciled, and the provision of primary care. And one reason for highlighting this is that Revenue are going to be doing some communications around MTD for income tax, which I think is going out to agents and potentially taxpayers. And it talks about digital records, it talks about quarterly submissions, and then it includes filing a tax return, which is going to give people the impression that you've got 4 quarterly submissions and you've got a tax return as at the moment under self-assessment, and that's not correct. So I'm hoping that the information starts becoming more accurate, but do be careful. Just don't assume that everything you get from Revenue MTD for income tax is 100% correct. Sadly, it's not. Next slide, please, Dorcas. Okay, so who's eligible for the public beta? So this starts in April this year. We took this from the slide for the private beta. There are only a couple of changes. So the must-haves haven't changed. You need a national insurance number, which is ironic because you have to be registered for self-assessment, and to do that you'd have a UTR. Your details have to be up to date, so that's your name, address, your business details. All the payments have to be made as well. And then the requirement is that you've got income from either a sole trade or property, and that can be UK or foreign. Now, by default, the system supports an accounting period matching the tax year. It can also support an accounting period, say the year to 31st of March. For the second one, there has to be an election made within software for a calendar quarter election. We don't have that currently. That's going to be there for the next quarter. And also, it'll be possible in the future to support non-aligned accounting periods. That'll be on our roadmap, but it's not something that's there currently. The can-haves all seem fairly obvious. You've got UK dividends, interest, charitable giving. The only change from the private beta is the high income child benefit charge and also the joint property ownership. Those two moved from the can't have to the can have column, and then you can see that you can't have partnership or income from a partnership, be an MP, Minister of Religion, anything in that last column. Okay, so we have another poll.
And I think with the feedback that Leslie just mentioned around who can and can't, talking to some of our customers, the eligibility criteria has been somewhat of a blocker. So it'll be really interesting to understand who is and who isn't going to be participating in the public beta. So some of the results are coming in. It wasn't even split, but now those who are going to be joining the public beta this April is at 29%, and those that aren't going to be joining the beta this year and deferring to mandation is at 72%. So that's just gone up. So those are really interesting results, and I think as we progress some of these conversations, it'll be really interesting to start to chat to some of those people that are looking at deferring and why are they looking to defer would be really interesting to understand.
Can I just come in on that? For the public beta that starts next year is the last time to join the pilot before it goes live. One of the reasons why it was postponed last time, as well as the agent rep obviously been against it, was that the sandbox environment wasn't fit for purpose. I wouldn't say it's entirely fit for purpose now, but it's better than it was. And in one sense, you've got a numbers game that HMRC can be looking to get a certain amount of numbers. So for the private beta, they were looking for 1,600. They've got 44, of which only 32 made the first quarter submission. But it's not just a numbers game. We can't test accurately against the sandbox because of the way that it's been written. We call an API, we've got to tell it what scenario we're testing. Are we testing a self-employment and a property. And it's silly things like that, even for the cumulative quarterly reporting. Even though that's the only type of quarterly reporting you can do in 25-26, we have to tell the sandbox that's what we're doing. The only way to test it, sadly, is to get taxpayers using the live system. And that's going to be the only way to show whether or not MTD for income tax is fit for purpose. So there's a couple of things. So selfishly, from my point of view, I'd like you to sign up, your customers to sign up so that we can get more testing. But it also gives you an opportunity to look at your processes and how you're going to work with taxpayers if mandation date does stay as it is as April 2026. Thanks, Dorcas. Back to you.
Thanks, Leslie. So for those that are aware and will be taking part in the pilot, do you have any indication around, let me rephrase that for those that are in mandation, do you have any indication of the proportion of your clients that will be impacted by this? So we've got some results coming in, a large proportion, around 23%, don't know or it's not applicable. We've got but for the large majority, which is about 30%, are saying it's 11 to 25% of the customer base, which kind of sounds about right from the conversations that I've been having with customers. And then there's a few where it's 100%, at just 3%, where their client base will be impacted by that. So moving on to the roadmap, Leslie's mentioned as part of the flow and process a little bit around some of the functionality that we will be having. So just to point these out specifically, what we have available now and what I will be running as part of the demo is the ability for us to launch an MTD or quarterly submission through CCH as your starting point. We've also got the capability now to be able to set up that client, request MTD authorization so that you can do their submissions on their behalf, as well as supporting both the UK property and self-employment businesses. We've got the first phase of the data import, which is going to be by spreadsheet, but we are going to be expanding on this and are actively in discovery at the moment around the user experience and the workflow around importing or integrating with bookkeeping systems so that we can import data in a really seamless way. And what we're looking at is kind of importing through the top 3 players in the game when it comes to bookkeeping tools. So those are your Sages, the Xeros, and the QuickBooks, which the customers have fed back are really important. So that's the first phase of our integrations, but we will look to expand as much as we possibly can. The end goal is, I'm keen for us to expand to as many bookkeeping solutions because we know it's not a one shoe fits all. You're not going to have one client or your entire client base using a particular solution. We're also going to be building out the capabilities for us to import data from accounts production, and that's both the on-prem and the cloud, so that we can import data through that means. And then we're going to be building out the final declaration piece. So work was started on that before the delay was announced. So we were in a really good space with that. We built out the non-business income sources for charitable giving, UK interest, dividends, employments. So what we'll be doing is just updating some of those APIs and then building out some remaining elements per HMRC's roadmaps for all of the supported data sources that they have available to us as software vendors. With that, I'll jump into the demo and show you what MTD looks like in action. So the first thing that we will have to do is set up our client authorization, or our own practice authorization, sorry. And this is just to ensure that CCH as a software is able to make submissions. So what we can do is we can go to HMRC's webpage. And this is all done directly through the system. We can go through the workflow, we can sign in, so I'll use my credentials that I've got at hand. This is a dev environment, so bear with me whilst this loads up. So all you need is your user ID, and then you'd enter in your password. You'd enter in the national insurance number, and then you'll just give the software permission. And once that's done, you'll just need to start the process when it comes to the MTD journey. So I'll just minimize that. So like Leslie mentioned, the starting point for us is in Central. So what you can do is create a brand new tax return. So this is a brand new client. We haven't created any tax returns in the past. So we'll start off. What we've done is we've included a new return type. So you'll select your tax year 2026. And then within the drop down, we've got the SA100, we've got the R40. We've now included making tax digital for income tax as a option to select. Once you hit next, you then have the capabilities to link this client to an existing workflow. If you've created a specific workflow for MTD, this is the point where you could link that client to that. And then you just get a notification box to let you know that you're being redirected to the cloud and the iFirm platform. So what's happening here is the system is just pushing through the client information and the underlying data. So things like the client name, the client's national insurance number, their date of birth, their address, their postcodes, etc. So all of the underlying data that you have stored in Central, that gets pushed into the cloud. Because this is a first-time client, we need to request authorization. We do give you the option to view the link and copy the link so that you can send it off to your client either via email. Just to caveat that this is a dev environment, so we've got the request ID here, so it's just a smoother process for us. So once you've got approved, and you can now act on behalf of the client to make submissions, we get back the obligations required for this client. So here we've got the obligations for the UK property, and then the obligations for the self-employment, and all the quarters at the moment are grayed out, and we will be adding in the capabilities to do cumulative quarters and have that released by the end of this quarter. So it will be part of the April release. If I was to go back into Central, we can see now that we've got this tax return created, and then we've got the type mentioned as well. So it's really easy for you to identify what type of return it is and what services you're offering to that client. I'll just go into a client that has a bit more information, and you can see the workflow here a bit more clearly, where you've got some historic tax returns that you created, and you can tell what's available in Central, and you can access them, and what's available in the iFirm application, and what is an MTD versus a standard self-assessment return. To be able to access your MTD returns once they have been created, you simply have to click on the hyperlink as you do today. And the simple change here is that you will be once again redirected into the platform. So you just get this little pop up just to let you know, but you can ask for this not to appear again once you've got used to this workflow. So that opens up my client. And here we've made some submissions already for their Q1, their Q2, and we'll just start to make the submissions for their Q3. So we can go in and we can click on add income and expenses, and we get the option to upload via the spreadsheet. Again, this is just the first method that we've implemented, and we will be implementing the capabilities to directly import data from bookkeeping tools. Because we're using a template, we've created the templates for you either in separated quarters or in combined quarters. And you just have a look and feel around how that looks like. For a lot of our customers where they've got, I don't want to say competent clients, some of the clients work on spreadsheets already. So you can essentially add in those tabs or add in those spreadsheets into this template and then have it linked to this master sheet and pull through the information so that it can be imported into iFirm. So this is just the example of the data I'll be importing, and this has the combined quarters. So I'll just go back, I'll go into my upload, and then I'll upload that information, and it's been populated into the relevant boxes within the data entry field. If I'm happy with that, I can go back and we can see that we've got the file linked here, but we haven't finalized or submitted this submission yet. So I'll go back in, finalize, and then make my submission. I'll just confirm that. And if I go back into the system, it will let us know that we're now in Q4 as we made the submission for Q3, and we get a nice little green tick just to notify us that the obligation has been fulfilled for that quarter. And then we can go through the workflow and do that whole process again around uploading our documents, going through the flow, finalizing and confirming our submission. And then we get a view of all the quarters. Leslie mentioned that we will be adding in the cumulative quarters. So like I said at the start, where we've got the dependencies on one quarter being submitted before the next quarter is made active, that will be removed once the cumulative quarters are implemented by our development team. So that's the flow. I'll just pass over to Leslie for some comments.
So we have implemented the cumulative quarters. The one thing we haven't done is we haven't changed any of the UI from where it really was a couple of years ago. The focus for the team last quarter was, with a new team come on board to work on this, was to get familiar with the APIs, and this quarter was updating to the APIs that are needed for the cumulative quarters. If you look at the dates for those quarters, they are the cumulative quarter dates. The only difference being that in future you'll be able to do Q2 without submitting Q1. Again, for the pilot, that's going to be fine because there'll be no penalties for people that are in MTD voluntarily. Back to you, Dorcas.
Thanks, Leslie. So yeah, this is our first iteration to start onboarding customers onto the pilot, those that are interested in taking part. There will be changes. So the one benefit with cloud is that we're working on in sprints, and our sprints are typically 2 weeks. So we are able to release features at a much quicker pace rather than having to wait for quarterly releases as we do in on-prem. So the big focus for us once we've got all of the changes in is to be able to update some of this UI so it's a little bit slicker. And then we'll start to focus on, like we said, delivering out the final declaration. So we started work on it. It's just continuing that work. So we're in a really good space with that for when it's required. So our aim is to release the final declaration a year before it's needed. So for those that are taking part in the pilot, your first final declaration submission doesn't need to be submitted until 2027. We're aiming to have the final declaration ready for those supported APIs that HMRC has on their roadmap by April 2026. If we go back into Central and go into the homepage, when I was creating that client, I linked my workflow so we can see the client workflow in here. There is an action for us because at the moment, some of these workflows, not some, all of the workflows need to be manually triggered. We are actively investigating how we can automate some of this so that once an action or a status changes in iFirm, we can automatically update the status in Central for reporting purposes. So that's the full end-to-end demo. I'll go back into presentation. So just to summarize in terms of some of the key actions, I think one of the key call outs is essentially to not delay. We've been given a grace period with HMRC delaying it last year and the year before. But I think at the moment it's really important for us to start to look at our clients again and assess the impact of those that will be affected. So we've provided some reports in CCH reporting to allow you to run these reports to identify mandated clients for both the 50k threshold and the 30k threshold. And that will be available as part of the April release. But if you need those reports now, they are available on the support portal, and you can download those reports and upload them into CCH reporting and be able to use them now instead of having to wait for that April release. Step 2 is also about deciding your approach. Like Leslie says, we're really big advocates around taking part in the pilot so that you can, one, understand what that end-to-end process looks like using software and also utilizing HMRC system. One of the key things that I've heard from customers is, okay, we can take part in a pilot, but it's going to be dummy data. That's not the case. It's going to be a live client and there's going to be live data that you're sending over to HMRC. So it's really important for you to kind of utilize this opportunity to do that run through with HMRC and with support from us as well, kind of hand holding you through that process. And it's also about identifying some of those clients that aren't on bookkeeping solutions and trying to get them onto tools that is going to work for them. And then it's all about looking at your practice as well and assessing how MTD can benefit your practice. What additional services are you able to support and what additional services are you able to give to your customers? Even though it sounds daunting, having to essentially make 4 submissions potentially each month at the least, it does give you that opportunity to have more regular touch points with your customers. So instead of maybe touching base with your customers once a year, you have those additional opportunities to really build those rapport and get customers engaged in their tax filings as much as taxpayers hate being involved in that process. And then lastly, it's all about reviewing all of your options, reviewing all of your workflows, your processes, and all the solutions that you as a firm use today, and making sure that how do they connect? How do they talk to each other? How can you get data from one place to another in a really seamless way that isn't disjointed or causing friction? But also, what are some of the additional solutions that you would need, and how can you upskill and get your team trained up as quickly as possible so that they're proficient in the new tools that they're using and also in the new services and the new processes that may be needed for MTD. So with that, it's a shameless plug for myself and Leslie, again, just to really advocate for you guys to join the beta with us. And like I said, it's you'll be given that support not just from us but from HMRC. So they're very keen on supporting agents and taxpayers through the process. So if you were to scan the QR code that's on screen, it will just take you to a form for you to fill that will just register your interest in taking part in the pilot. And either myself or your account manager will reach out and we can start that process of, one, getting you onboarded, and two, having further discussions around your business processes and what clients that you have could be eligible to take part. If you want to meet us in person, we will be attending and hosting at a few events this year. And some key call outs that are upcoming is the Festival of Accounting and Bookkeeping in March. And then we'll also be attending the Digital Accountancy Show in April. And then the big event of the year, which is Accountex. So you'll find myself as well as the rest of the product team. If you don't just want to talk MTD, you want to talk some of our other cloud products, you can find us at stand 1460 at Accountex. And lastly, for myself, this is the first of the episodes that we're running around MTD. So we've showcased the product to you. We want to really take you on that journey whilst we get prepared for mandation. So this is the first kind of series episode in showcasing the product. The next episode is around navigating the quarterly reporting. So myself and Leslie will go into a bit more detail around that end-to-end process, talk through some of the data, etc. And then the third episode is more focused around what that final declaration process is going to be and look like. Not just in iFirm, but for MTD in its entirety, to get you really comfortable in understanding the difference between the final declaration versus the current self-assessment process. And then lastly, it's just the last episode is just the final readiness stages as we prepare for the April mandation. So hopefully you've registered to the entire series, or if there's specific episodes that you're interested in, then please do join us for those. We'll go into some Q&A. I did see some coming through in the chat. I'll just load those up. Okay, so the first question is around what happens if we find out someone has failed non-residency after the end of year tax? Will they be penalised for making quarterly submissions?
So the answer is they won't be penalised for not making quarterly submissions. There are no penalties for people that are in MTD voluntarily. There aren't APIs to deal with non-residency. In that case, the taxpayer would need to be taken out of MTD for income tax. And my assumption is they'll be put back into self-assessment. If I pick up the next question from Michelle, yeah, profit share from an LP is not part of MTD for income tax. There was a slide which showed that if you've got partnership income, then you won't be welcome in the beta. It's not something that they currently deal with. As you've pointed out, probably when they introduce MTD for partnership tax, it will probably come in there. If we bypass, say no comments on that one. Do you cover joint tenancy ownership? As part of the spreadsheet we've got currently, it's up to you to enter or to aggregate the income. I don't know if Dorsey wants to mention any potential partnerships.
Yeah, so it's something that we're actively looking at. One of the main goals with developing out this MTD product that we have in mind is making sure that that data management and data process is as seamless as it possibly can. So we're looking to partner and integrate with as many as we possibly can, but we are going through a review of the feedback that we're getting from our customers and then prioritizing them based off of popularity and usage as well. So like I mentioned, some of the key ones are around the bookkeeping integrations, and then we're also integrating with third-party softwares that handle and deal with specifically landlords themselves.
Okay. The next one asks about 5 returns and all. There aren't 5 returns. The data for the businesses, so that's sole trade, UK property and foreign property, that's submitted quarterly. So the due dates for the quarters in the beta are the 5th of August for Q1, so the 5th of August following the end of Q1. For Q2, it's the 5th of November. For Q3, the 5th of February, and Q4, the 5th of May. When it goes live, those dates are going from the 5th to the 7th to align with the dates for MTD. And then it's other information that needs to be submitted before the final declaration is made. Dorcas showed you the process for doing the submission. It's actually quite painless once the information is there, whether it's done in a bookkeeping solution or it's bridged in via a spreadsheet. The actual thing of doing the quarterly submission is painless. And as Dorcas pointed out, you saw the green tick there. The obligation was treated as fulfilled almost instantaneously. The final declaration is all going to be part of CSH IFIRM MTD for income tax. So Central remains the source of truth for the clients, but the quarterly submissions, the final declaration will all be done in the cloud software. Okay. Next question's to do with if they've got property income and UK property and foreign property income. I was aware, attending the presentation was somebody was being charged for a license for each business that they had. I don't know what licensing model is. Dorcas, that's something you want to comment on?
Yeah, I could pick that up. So like we said, we are encouraging customers to take part in the MTD pilot. And with that, we are offering not just the MTD solution, but our cloud personal tax solution you'd get for free for this year if you do want to just trial it before mandation. So you've got a really good opportunity there. So it'll be part of your existing license and we won't be charging you any extra for MTD for the first year.
Okay, the next question from Lawrence is about non-residents can't join beta but still required to register. No, at the moment there are no APIs, so you can't say you could register, but I don't think you could join MTD as a non-resident. If you have a national insurance number, so from an anonymous attendee, you need to have a national insurance number on the 31st of January before the start of the tax year. If that's not the case, then you are exempt from joining MTD for income tax. Okay, the next one from Matthew is about having a March 31 year end. Yes, that's taken care of by having the calendar quarter election, which we'll have in our software from the next quarter. Michelle's asked about what's been submitted in the quarterly submissions. If you think about the information that's on the SA 103, so your turnover, other income, and the expenses, that's what's been submitted as part of the quarterly submissions. And it's similar if you look at the top of page 2 of the SA 105, so your rents and then your rental expenses. The next one, is it the gross income or net profit? It is gross income from whatever source. I mentioned about the reports that are currently there. So this year, 24-25 is key. If your clients have gross income from sole trade and or UK property and or foreign property in excess of £50,000 for 24-25, then they'll be mandated to join MTD for income tax from the 6th of April. The logic being is that the filing date for 24-25 is the 31st of January 2026. The next tax year starts on the 6th of April 2026. And that threshold goes down to 30,000 for the next tax year. Okay. The next question is about CSH IFIRM. I'm assuming it's personal tax. So we're developing CSH IFIRM personal tax. The difference we've got there is that we're taking a fully functional product on premise into the cloud. So we're not going to have like for like straight away. At the moment, I can't give a date of when that's going to be completely finished. For MTD for income tax, it's a different approach. We've done, or by the end of this quarter, we'll have done the work for the cumulative quarterly submissions. And then following that, we'll add on the other data sources and the flow. The Revenue have a roadmap on their website, and they've got dates which go through, so release in April next year for the cumulative quarter. There's a release, I think, in June, which is for post-finalisation amendments or amended tax returns. And then there's a whole list of other APIs that haven't yet been delivered by the Revenue. So for MTD for income tax, we're going to build it up gradually. It's one of those things. It doesn't need to be there from day one. We only need enough to be in the pilot, and then we'll build it out. And I'm assuming that the other software developers are working on the same basis. Is MTD only on iFirm? Yes, MTD for income tax is being developed purely in the cloud. Okay, we've got a question here. If the client is already on our normal gateway and they're copied across to our agent services account, will they still need separate authorization? My understanding is that they need separate authorization for MTD for income tax. Sort of cheeky question by Hannah. If there are no penalties, why not submit Q1, Q2, Q3 in Q4? Yes, you could do that. And that would be fine for the pilot. Just bear in mind that once they're mandated, if they miss one of the deadlines, there's a penalty point. Once you get 2 penalty points, I believe it's a £200 penalty. So it's expensive in the new regime.
Just conscious of time, we've got a minute left. So there's quite a few more questions. And what me and Leslie will do is we'll look to reply to those people individually. We'll send out, I think we've got your email details, and we'll contact you separately. I guess just to close out, if you are interested in taking part in the pilot, and again, do reach out to myself or your account manager, and then we can start to get you ready to start looking at our MTD solution. Like I said, our MTD product is going to be free this year for the pilot, so do take advantage of that. Yes, thank you everyone, and yeah, do look out for a follow-up feedback form. All feedback is great feedback around these, especially as we're running this as a series. Would be keen to hear your thoughts on how this has run, and if there are any additional topics that you would like us to cover in the next episodes. Thanks for your time.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.
Bye.